With Reg. So a lot of information coming out on ISIS lately. Not your usual propaganda, kind of counter-propaganda. Well, maybe it's I don't believe it to be propaganda. I'm actually more inclined to believe it's truth. It looks like the Sudanese Prime Minister and the Egyptian Prime Minister are out there saying that the United States is actually more, ISIS is more of a creation of theirs than they are trying to defeat them. I mean, you're looking at it, a lot of people still can't grasp the concept that the U.S. would be responsible, not just so in the U.S., but also the Mossad would be responsible for these ISIS guys because of where they got their humble beginnings. You had Walter Clark, is that the guy's name? Anyway, he's, says, look, and the same thing that Joe Biden said and stuff like that. Again, there's never any accountability on people like this, so they can really tell you anything. They can even actually tell you the truth, and there'll be no backlash for them. He says, look, we started out arming the Free Syrian Army, and then from there they grew into ISIS. And, the rebels back each other, right? Now, here's the problem. I believe it is in Fallujah. There was, they say, CIA helicopters, which would be basically army helicopters flying for the CIA, flying around, dropping off weapons to the so-called moderate rebels, which just happened to be ISIS. Now, there's video footage out there, and it's pretty damning, but again, we've been seeing for a good while now, airdrops going to ISIS. At the same time, again, you have the Sudanese Prime Minister saying these are, basically guys that were back from the Mossad, which is Israel, and it's true. No treats yet, it's too early. It's too early for treats. Ooh, fresh garlic. Nice. And, powerful. Saying that, they don't really want to, the Egyptian Prime Minister is out there saying, look, they don't really want to defeat these guys. And again, it comes back to the same old. They're really just trying to overthrow Assad. It's the same propaganda, or the same play, back in the late 70s, early 1980s, that the Americans did with the Mujahideen, because they keep referring to it. And that's your hint, that's your checklist right there. So, look, we once propped up the Mujahideen to overthrow the Russians in Afghanistan. It's the same play with ISIS. It's just ISIS is a lot more extreme than what the Mujahideen were in the sense of globally, because the Mujahideen didn't go outside of, they didn't go outside of Afghanistan. They pretty much stayed there, and they ended up getting into a fight with the Taliban. Then eventually the Taliban overtook the Mujahideen, and one tribe absorbs the other, so to speak. You'd say, okay, well, they're not really tribal. Well, they are kind of tribal. Gang, tribe, organization. Pick your verbiage. To argue over the semantics of it is kind of pointless. So I think it's pretty clear, what ISIS is. They're an ideology made up of several different groups of jihadists. Some are Sunni, some are Shiite. Yes, those two groups don't get along, but if their goal is to overthrow Assad, they might get along long enough to do that. And that's what you're seeing. You're also seeing, and I tend to agree with the Egyptian Prime Minister and stuff like that, there's so many people with their hands in the cookie jar on this one, that, got two things of mushrooms, that it's, very obvious that these guys could not get as far as they did without the CIA backing. You even have ex-CIA agents out there saying, yeah, we basically built this boogeyman like they normally do. Again, the CIA and the Mossad are like the two biggest, and Saudi Arabia, these are the three biggest terrorist organizations on the planet. This idea that, that order out of chaos, Harry Kissinger's stuff, Ronald Reagan referred to those guys as the lunatics in the basement, but now they're out and clear. There's nothing more scary than the ideas of Harry Kissinger. Making spaghetti. It's like spaghetti, but spaghetti. Actually, macaroni is what I'm making. So, at the end of the day, when we strip it all away and we look at it, we can't blame one person. We're not going to say it's just Obama. No, it's the people around him. It's pretty much the entire U.S. government or the Congress or whatever that has basically went along with this. And you can find out who votes to arm the rebels, McCain and Kerry and stuff like that. They're, they say, okay, well, these guys are the moderates. We've got to be careful who the weapons get in the hands. Joe Biden So there's some on the left, there's many on the right that are basically for arming basic people to overthrow Assad. So it's about overthrowing Assad. Now, why do they have to overthrow Assad so much? Well, there's a few things that are up here. Number one, if they get rid of Assad, they're on the doorstep of Iran. Then they can attack Iran. They're doing it one country at a time, the CIA. So once they do that, then they can get into Iran. After that, they can get to China. But also, too, as another bonus, is that it spreads Russia thin. So the idea, again, this also making a bit of a connection, too, with Ukraine. It's the same destabilization tactic kind of used in Ukraine at a very basic level, slightly different details, but same kind of thing. But the idea is to spread Russia thin so they can't defend both. They can't help Assad too much and help the pro-Russian side of the Ukraine without spreading themselves thin. Now, the Russians have already been duped on this back in the 1980s. They're not going to fall for it again. That's why they're not getting into, that's probably why they're sticking back from Assad. It doesn't mean they're not helping them. They're just playing more smartly about it. And I think the way the Russians are going to do it is to play the same game. In fact, it seems like the idea that was used to defeat the Russians for the Cold War is at play again. The idea was to make the Russians spend so much on their military that they would just break their economy, and that's what happened, so-called in the 90s. But I don't think they really broke the economy because of all the equipment you're seeing now. Like, Russia's economy is not the best economy in the world, it never will be, but it's not in the tatters it was in the 1990s. It never really collapsed. All that you're seeing, that you saw in the 90s, I say the Russians never collapsed. All they did is they gave away the businesses on pennies on the dollar for all the oligarchs and put the rest of the money into the military complex. Almost the exact same thing you're seeing in the United States, where all the wealth is leaving the people, it's going into the industrial military complex. So you have to have a death-based economy and a perpetual war in order to keep that going. If not, they will not be able to justify the billions of dollars and the black budgets and all that in the States. So they have to have a boogeyman at all times. Now, a controllable boogeyman, this is the problem. The ISIS guys are not really that easy to control. You don't know where they're going to show up. But so the idea is kind of like herding frogs or cattle. It's like, okay, just try to corral them back into Syria so that they can keep doing the damage there. Now, that said, when you see helicopters flying around, dropping off weapons to the ISIS guys, you see the Globe Masters dropping off weapons to the ISIS guys. I mean, there's only so many times that's going to be a screw-up. After 15 or 20 times, it's a pattern, And, I well, it was the Iraqi Air Force that accidentally dropped the weapons to ISIS. Problem is they're not the one flying the Globe Masters. That do the airdrops. They're not flying the. It's not the Iraqi Air Force. So it's deliberate. They've been caught at it a few times. But now you're slowly starting to see in the mainstream media, people saying, well, we accidentally armed these guys and they turned radical. So when you hear the term moderate rebels, there are no moderate rebels. If there were, they got killed out by the al-Nusra Front a long time ago. But you also have an interesting thing happening now, where apparently in Libya, kind of, it's like Gaddafi's revenge or something, saying what would happen if he was overthrown. And you have to understand, when Gaddafi got overthrown, I think he got overthrown for the same reason that Saddam got overthrown. He was going to, basically he was going to, a gold-backed dinar, he was going to have aquifers and really help the people there. There can never be stability in the Middle East as long as you have the CIA or the Mossad around. They can't allow their countries around them to prosper, because then they'll lose victim status, right? So there's a lot of things there. They have to keep the terrorism going. Their whole plan is really not, it's really that order out of chaos. It's the only thing that fits. Other than that, they're just genocidal maniacs. I don't see any big vision that they're going for, other than to destabilize. And what they really think they're going to get out of this, I don't think they are. The control, because you could control the Middle East by doing business. You could, like what China does. They do it that way. Now, there's a couple of reasons to get rid of Gaddafi, why they got rid of him. That would be number one. Number two, Gaddafi, again, like most Middle Eastern dictators, was an iron fist. Saddam, the crime rate in Iraq was quite low when he was alive. Why people were just too terrified to break the law there. Rightfully so. He's not a guy you'd really want to, really tick off, right? So, with that going on, you have Another reason to get rid of Gaddafi. Well, Gaddafi, if you look at the Mediterranean, you've got Europe over here, you've got Turkey here, and you've got, you're coming around, you've got Libya over here, right? And if he's kind of breaking that front, well then, no one's going to get by Gaddafi's guys, right? He's got to stay, his country was stable. He had control over the guys. He'd pound these guys back, he'd stomp them into the ground. You get rid of him, now you've got this big, vulnerable front that is overlooking Europe. Kind of like 1,400 years ago. Almost the same. It's almost the same plan. So ISIS has come out after recently taking some sort of an airport, and they now have access to fighter jets. But even if they have access to fighter jets, doesn't mean they got fighter pilots that are competent. I mean, for example, the Israelis, it takes 5 years to bring a pilot up to scratch to be good enough in the Israeli Air Force. And they got pretty good pilots. I will give the Israelis the hand on the military stuff. They don't mess around with their training. In Canada, the United States, I think after Canada, I think you fly 2,000 hours a year roughly. It might be less now. It depends on budget cutbacks and stuff like that. But after 120 hours, you're mission ready. It doesn't mean you're going to be an expert pilot, right? 120 hours of flying time. That's not a lot of experience, really, when you think about it. That's if you flew 40 hours a week, which most people, probably not going to fly that much in 1 week, but if you flew 40 hours a week, that's 3 weeks. 3 weeks of training. So obviously, before you're mission ready, you might fly about 2,000 hours before you're really mission ready, but doesn't mean you're going to be a really good hotshot pilot. So that said, if ISIS, even if they were to get the latest and greatest aircraft, doesn't mean they're going to be really good at what they do. But it doesn't mean that, even a MiG-21 is still a threat to today's standards. A MiG-21 could hop over from Libya into southern Europe. It'd probably be a one-way mission, considering the short range of the MiG-21. But the thing is that, drop a couple of bombs, white phosphorus, whatever, a few rocket pods, whatever. They could do enough damage to kill a bunch of people. Is the point. Will that happen? I don't know. I'm pretty sure the Italian Air Force would intercept them before they would get over there. So they have another idea, these ISIS guys, is to take 500,000 people and just do mass immigration, send them off in boats and flood them into Europe. Basically, have a few boats sink so that the Coast Guard is completely overwhelmed, and you just have 250,000 people showing up in Greece, or probably Italy and wherever, maybe Spain, show up there. While the Coast Guards are out there trying to rescue all these drowning refugees, handfuls of jihadis will be making it into the Europe. But the thing is they've already been doing that. They just want to up the scale. That's all. It's not a new plan. There's been signs of jihadists getting into the United States with the open Mexican border. The damage is done. They're already there. Again. Like I said, the jihadists are already here. Hang on, got a dog out there. So that's kind of a few things that are new development. I think people are just catching on to this idea that they're trying to get boots on the ground. Well, they already have boots on the ground against ISIS. Something like 2,600 U.S. troops are already in Iraq. Apparently they're just training, but again, these guys are going to be shot at some point. They're going to have to respond. So it's a war that's never going to end. It can't end, because if it does, the U.S. has no economy if they were to pull back from the war right now. It's the only thing that's... It's not so much making money, it's basically dispersing debt. Again, debt and bombs. Every time you spend money in foreign wars over there, you're keeping the inflation at home low because you're using up that money. That money has to get used up. Now, they could do the same thing in other means by, investing in infrastructure and stuff like that. Problem is that an $18 trillion deficit and growing, you can't keep ahead of it. You can't keep ahead of that. It's just way too much. So it really leaves you with one option: go to war, or let things collapse, and then you'll have a revolution. Well, there's going to be a revolution in the States at some point. The thing is insolvent right now. You got 93 or 96 million people out of work. You're going to have a revolution. Get ready for it. What I tell people is just stay out of the way, because when people lose everything, they're going to lose it. The thing is that the bankers are going to go down. The politicians. All the politicians that have basically made these things happen. yes, the masses of people have no clue of what's going on because they only watch the mainstream media. But there's a high majority of people, we're talking in the millions, in every country that is awake. Even in Canada, we're what, 35 million people maybe by now? 33.5 million or 35 million, we'll say. The last count was in 2011. Out of that, even if only 1 million people know who the puppeteers are, when the SHTF happens and people start taking to the streets, kind of like your Occupy Wall Street types or your communist students, out there protesting for this, protesting for that, well, the DHS isn't going to be really worried about those people. The people they're worried about is the people who knows what names to go after, which politicians did what bankers did what. That's what they're worried about. That's what they were talking about in Davos. That, hey, we're going to be held accountable. So the Committee of 300, your Rockefellers, your Rothschilds, your Soroses, even your Bill and Melinda Gateses, and of course every politician in the Congress, they're going to who's going to protect these people? Nobody. So that's why all these kind of anti-terrorism things that really do kind of crack down on regular civilians and stuff like that. That's why all these bills are being passed, anti-terrorism bills, which you'll notice that some of these anti-terrorism bills have a lot to do with cybersecurity. We had Anonymous basically take an attack on ISIS and their website. I still don't know what to make of Anonymous. I think, here's the thing. Here's a group that nobody can seem to catch, but yet the NSA can spy on every single person on the planet that has a digital device or a dishwasher. So I have issues. I'm not saying they're bad guys. I'm not saying they're good guys. I'm saying I don't know. But apparently they went after, they could be controlled opposition. Who knows? But assuming that they are the good guys, they went after the ISIS guys a couple of weeks ago. I forgot to mention it. And that's kind of a good thing, but these guys, if they can go after the ISIS guys, and here's a lot of problems with the propaganda with the ISIS guys. Number one, everybody's speaking English in the ISIS videos, with British accents and stuff like that. Not all the ISIS videos. You can tell, the ones where the guy's sitting in there in a cave, kind of with his other jihadi buddies, and sitting there, and you have to read the captions. Okay, they might be legit. I'm not saying there's no legitimate jihadists out there. The majority of them are, but the people controlling at the tops that do the strategic moves are probably CIA, NSA, or CIA, Mossad, that type of thing controlled. If you just look at what gets overthrown, what gets, it just kind of, there's a pattern that keeps coming up, right? And the shock value of it, again, is really set up for Western media, European and North American consumption. It's there was a Turkish show that used the exact same thing, the same brilliant, bright orange jumpsuits and the same type of execution methods on their TV show. And now we see it in almost a Hollywood-like production, which there's some people say, these are Hollywood productions and something. I don't really care if they are or not. Again, too many people waste time worrying about whether they're false flags or not. These attacks don't matter if they're false flags. Even if it's openly admitted that it's a false flag, it doesn't matter. It's what is the reaction? What rights are you going to lose? That's what you need to look at. What is it that they have, waiting in the wings, ready to go when these events happen? Right now, we got Bill C-51 here in Canada for the anti-terrorism. Well, I haven't had a chance to go over the bill yet. If somebody has a link to the bill, because again, I don't have internet anymore at the house, so I have to go to the library. But if you could send me that link the next time I go into the library, probably Monday. Today's Friday. I'll check out that link and I'll give you my 2 cents on it. And, I'd like to go very in depth on that bill, just to give you guys an idea of how these anti-terrorism bills that are kind of popping up all over the world, how they're very in line, and a lot of it has to do with being able to spy on absolutely everybody. Now, a lot of people, and people I know too, because they don't really know 100% what's going on. They don't know that these ISIS guys wouldn't exist had guys like Saddam Hussein. I'm not saying Saddam was a good guy, but I bet you there's a lot of people over there that miss him now, as bad as he was. At least you weren't going to be beheaded. You had the Republican Guard kind of protecting you to a degree. You didn't step out of line because you were pretty much executed right away, very brutally, or even if they suspected you of something, they'd just snatch you into the light. But then again, how was Saddam's regime any different than Homeland Security? They can just snatch you up in the middle of the night. No warrant needed. No No charges needed whatsoever. So how are these guys different? How are they different from the Stasi police of East Germany? How are they different from Stalin's Red Army? You know what I mean? Like how there's so much similarities now. And again, people think, well, we have to do something against these terrorists. And it was something that Hitler talked about as well, that you don't want to take rights from people. You want people to give, if you have the right incident, they will demand you take their rights away from you. This is again, the Third Reich policies that are still in play now are most people are too dumbed down to know much about history. I don't know everything about history, nobody does. But you can see repetitive patterns such as that do lead to stuff that doesn't make anybody safer, but gives government almost absolute control, on the guise of safety, security, and protecting you. So when we look at it like that, again, it doesn't really matter if some of these incidents are false flags or not, because it's what's the reaction to it? What is government going to do in response to? And that's what you need to be concerned about. So with these ISIS guys, again, these guys wouldn't exist if you had, again, nobody can sit there and argue Gaddafi was worse than the ISIS guys, right? You can't argue Saddam was worse than the ISIS guys. They were bad men. They did a lot of horrible things, but they kept stability in the region. And so that your key here is that there is no stability in the region after, again, a well-funded coup. Started off with a Facebook protest in Syria. People got together to, rally for better human rights, all that stuff. Find fault with that. Next thing you know, you get armed jihadists popping up left, right, and center. You've got politicians like David Cameron, Francois Hollande, all these people coming out saying, go join the Free Syrian Army to overthrow Assad because he's an evil dictator. You've got airstrikes after airstrikes that keep hitting Assad's positions, and now you've got well over a million Syrian refugees. So the whole region is just completely destabilized. Okay? But yet, you had U.S. troops at the time hearing that, hey, wait a minute, you have Al-Qaeda joining up with the Free Syrian Army. Wait a minute, they're arming the Free Syrian Army. They're also arming Al-Qaeda. So we're fighting the bad Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we're arming the good Al-Qaeda in Libya and in Syria? U.S. troops were pretty ticked about that. That's why we don't have the boots on the ground right away, because I think it would just blow. I'm waiting for a U.S. coup in the U.S. by the U.S. military. Hopefully, not that many people die in it, but I think it's going to be pretty bloody. It will be a north and south type of thing, just because of the fact that people's, once they've realized how evil the CIA is, it's like, okay, so we're going to fight these guys and die for, truth and democracy. Meanwhile, you're supplying the very people that we're fighting. It's like the Chechen War with the Russians, where you have Russian generals supplying the Chechen rebels with weapons to keep the war going. War's a racket, right? So every time you hear, these U.S. senators and stuff like that talk about how greatly they, and I'm not just talking here Hillary Clinton, it's almost on a daily basis you hear this when they're talking about ISIS. Well, we armed, the Mujahideen to, take out the Soviets. Well, that's what they're telling you is, hint, hint, we're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing. But you have ex-CIA agents out there saying, no, we've been arming these guys, and we're still arming them. You've got Israel that's, basically taking jihadists, ISIS jihadists into their hospitals, stuff like that. So it's very clear, where the terrorism is coming from. Now, I'm not saying there's no good guys, there's nobody that can be trusted. But at the end of the day, when we see these new threats coming up, again, sending 250,000 refugees into Europe because ISIS is at the door. But the thing is they've already been there. They're already there. This is nothing new. I mean, they've been talking about it for a long time now. And yes, there are legitimate terrorists out there. But like anything, would these guys exist in the first place had they not got their funding? Now that they so-called have an air force, I'm not talking the Israeli air force that bombs on behalf of ISIS, because they keep bombing Assad's targets, or Assad's troops. So, again, just look for it. Again, we now have helicopters flying into Fallujah, dropping off weapons. So, again, who's in Fallujah? You know what I mean? It's not the good guys. So we'll have to watch that. Again, the general public is on the idea of, we got to go and beat ISIS. And it's true. These guys are going to have to be taken care of. But the problem is they'd be a hell of a lot easier to take care of if we stopped arming them in the first place. Again, just watch the weaponry that's going into their hands. Right now, they're talking about sending in more like Humvee-like vehicles with machine guns on the top of the roofs, and this is supposed to go to the moderate rebels. And again, Turkey, they're probably going to go through Turkey, but the problem is with Turkey, I mean, there's ISIS supporters in Turkey. I mean, it's the ideology is for the caliphate, basically the new Ottoman Empire, and basically, Sharia law everywhere. Now, somebody posted on my comment, one of my usual commenters, you probably, you know who you are, mentioned that, because I don't speak Arabic or like that, so he was saying that the dialogue sounded more from, like, I forget which countries he said. I think he said, like, Saudi Arabia, the countries that would be supporting this stuff. And that's interesting, that's stuff that, other people are going to pick up on. One guy on Alex Jones, he really hit the nail on the head on a few things. He said, when you see these jihadis and stuff like that, and all these, like the 4,000, Free Syrian Army type of guys that were trained up in Jordan, to fight not only ISIS but Assad, he says, when you see these guys training, watch their movements. He says, when you see how he says, the Green Berets, they have their own method of training. They have, there's certain tactics that they use. The Navy SEALs, they have their own. The Rangers, they have their own. The Army, they have their own. They all have their own thing. And he says, it's almost like a signature. He says, I'm not going to tell you who trained them, but if you figure out their tactics, how they jump out of a truck, he says, that'll tell you who trained them. And then you'll figure out who trained them in Jordan. Now, the thing is like anything, here we are training guys in Jordan, including al-Baghdadi, a guy that they had in the U.S. prison, an Iraqi prison, in the Buka prison. They trained this guy, like Saddam Hussein, like Osama bin Laden. They train these guys, and they and then they call them terrorists after you've given them the training. So with the Turks and the Kurds, we're going to have the same thing. Once they overthrow those guys, well, these guys become the new bad guy. Maybe they realize it now, maybe they don't, but they will be. There's no good guys there. So arming one or arming the other is just a bad idea all around. So with that said, how do you beat these guys? We got to isolate them, let them work it out within their own country. I think Assad, if we were to back anybody, Assad's army would be the one to back. And they're not going to do it because they want to overthrow Iran. And they want to get Assad out of there. I think it's becoming clear to people that something isn't right with these ISIS guys, the story. It doesn't, how are these guys also just popping out of the woodwork? Well, they were already there. So the radicalization, this anti-Muslim or anti-extremism summit that just took place with Obama's speech there, and you listen to the stuff he says, it's all nice, cozy, warm, and fuzzy, and sounds very good, and there's some good points made in there, sure, but he's talking, it's lip service. What's coming out of it? Well, more anti-terrorism laws, which just strip people of their rights, Now, with Bill C-51 here in Canada, I don't know all the details on it yet, so I don't know how bad it's going to be, or maybe there's some good stuff in it, who knows. But I do know the idea of people being snatched away in the middle of the night, any government can pretty much do that now legally. Remember, everything Hitler did and Stalin did in history was legal. Just because they make it law doesn't mean they make it right. So, things to watch out for anyway. So, we'll have to watch out more on the ISIS scare. But again, the Sudanese Prime Minister, I mean, he's in that world. He's in that community. He's going to know which groups are which. Same like Boko Haram. Again, the UN got caught supplying them with weapon or aid. It's getting pretty obvious at some point. And this is another reason why they want to ban, control the internet more, is because they're losing a narrative because people aren't buying the mainstream narratives as much. It's like, okay, well, you can't explain this, you can't explain this, and when you do, say, okay, well, we got caught at it, so yeah, we were doing that. But yet nobody's heads roll, you know what I mean? So at some point, what comes around goes around, and we'll have to watch out for that. But I guess I'll just leave it at that for now. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to help out further the channel. Maybe get some live chats and stuff in the future. I'll have to get my internet back again first, which is coming. I'm just going to shop around a bit before I get internet back in the house here. Will make life a lot easier. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Don't be afraid to take advantage of the comments down below. I don't censor my comments. Any information you think is relative to the story, throw it in. Maybe some of it is, because there's a lot of misinformation out there too, so, but you can sort of get an idea of where the facts lie and, what's true, what's not after just watching stuff for a good while. So, anyway, I'll leave it at that. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing. Have a great day. I'm making spaghetti or macaroni, but I got the macaroni claw.
Without this claw, you cannot make macaroni, and you're only making basically I don't know what you'd be making, but you must get one of these to make it. All right, there you go. Have a good one, eh? Hey, hi, and welcome, and once again, welcome to Cooking with Reg. So a lot of information coming out on ISIS lately. Not your usual propaganda, kind of counter-propaganda. Well, maybe it's I don't believe it to be propaganda. I'm actually more inclined to believe it's truth. It looks like the Sudanese Prime Minister and the Egyptian Prime Minister are out there saying that the United States is actually more, ISIS is more of a creation of theirs than they are trying to defeat them. I mean, you're looking at it, a lot of people still can't grasp the concept that the U.S. would be responsible, not just so in the U.S., but also the Mossad would be responsible for these ISIS guys because of where they got their humble beginnings. You had Walter Clark, is that the guy's name? Anyway, he's, says, look, and the same thing that Joe Biden said and stuff like that. Again, there's never any accountability on people like this, so they can really tell you anything. They can even actually tell you the truth, and there'll be no backlash for them. He says, look, we started out arming the Free Syrian Army, and then from there they grew into ISIS. And, the rebels back each other, right? Now, here's the problem. I believe it is in Fallujah. There was, they say, CIA helicopters, which would be basically army helicopters flying for the CIA, flying around, dropping off weapons to the so-called moderate rebels, which just happened to be ISIS. Now, there's video footage out there, and it's pretty damning, but again, we've been seeing for a good while now, airdrops going to ISIS. At the same time, and then you have the Sudanese Prime Minister saying these are, basically guys that were back from the Mossad, which is Israel, and it's true. No treats yet, it's too early. It's too early for treats. Ooh, fresh garlic. Nice. And, powerful. Saying that, they don't really want to, the Egyptian Prime Minister is out there saying, look, they don't really want to defeat these guys. And again, it comes back to the same old. They're really just trying to overthrow Assad. It's the same propaganda, or the same play, back in the late 70s, early 1980s, that the Americans did with the Mujahideen, because they keep referring to it. And that's your hint, that's your checklist right there. So, look, we once propped up the Mujahideen to overthrow the Russians in Afghanistan. It's the same play with ISIS. It's just ISIS is a lot more extreme than what the Mujahideen were in the sense of globally, because the Mujahideen didn't go outside of, they didn't go outside of Afghanistan. They pretty much stayed there, and they ended up getting into a fight with the Taliban. Then eventually the Taliban overtook the Mujahideen, and one tribe absorbs the other, so to speak. You'd say, okay, well, they're not really tribal. Well, they are kind of tribal. Gang, tribe, organization. Pick your verbiage. To argue over the semantics of it is kind of pointless. So I think it's pretty clear, what ISIS is. They're an ideology made up of several different groups of jihadists. Some are Sunni, some are Shiite. Yes, those two groups don't get along, but if their goal is to overthrow Assad, they might get along long enough to do that. And that's what you're seeing. You're also seeing, and I tend to agree with the Egyptian Prime Minister and stuff like that, there's so many people with their hands in the cookie jar on this one, that, we've got two things in mushrooms, that it's, very obvious that these guys could not get as far as they did without the CIA back. And you even have ex-CIA agents out there saying, yeah, we basically built this boogeyman like they normally do. Again, the CIA and the Mossad are like the two biggest, and Saudi Arabia, these are the three biggest terrorist organizations on the planet. This idea that, that order out of chaos, Harry Kissinger's stuff, Ronald Reagan referred to those guys as the lunatics in the basement, but now they're out and clear. There's nothing more scary than the ideas of Harry Kissinger. Making a spaghetti. It's like